Okay, guys and girls, welcome back to another week of, as always, what I like to call Mind Over Markets. These sessions are an opportunity for you guys to better improve your trading psychology, better understand yourselves, and from what we're seeing and hearing as part of the group, just becoming an all-round better human being. I think a lot of what we discuss here, I was saying this a little bit just before we started recording, a lot of what we discuss here can be applied to many different areas of life. And I think that's the beautiful thing about the psychology element. It helps you in many different situations, business, relationships, as a friend, partner, whatever it is. So I think there's a great application to apply all around if you're open to taking on board these concepts. So today, as I'm sure none of you are going to be surprised, we're going to be talking about another important topic. I think every topic I've basically picked out, I feel is super, super important as part of your journey. Today, specifically, we're going to be talking about discipline. Now, I've actually tailored this to encompass a variety of different things that I think all can kind of fall under the umbrella of discipline. So we're going to be talking a little bit about patience as well, just getting better at sticking to your plan. And I'm hoping what you guys are starting to see is some familiarity in a lot of the reasons why we experience certain issues and problems, but also in terms of the solutions as well. Once you understand the psychology behind a lot of why we experience what we tend to experience, then actually you find that the solutions that we start to apply can start to tackle multiple different things. And again, we'll start to unpack that a little bit today. So as always, I am going to just share my screen and pull up a whiteboard for you guys, which would double up as your notes at the end of the session. Again, I'm going to try and keep this as interactive as possible. So if you're open and able to, please feel free to get involved inside the chat. And of course, if you guys have questions throughout, we're going to have a dedicated Q&A session towards the end anyway. But if you do have any questions, if you want to stop me at any point so I can clarify anything further, please let me know in the chat and we'll dive into it as we go. I want to start off actually by throwing this out your guys' way, right? I want to just get a yes or no in the chat. How many of you guys, at least live on today's call, feel like you struggle with applying the right level of discipline in your trading? I think as soon as I asked that question, one person left. I'm not sure if that's a good or a bad sign. There we go. Anyone on today's call actually struggle with a lack of discipline? Okay. Okay, so a few yeses. All right, perfect. So this is probably going to be a good question to throw your guys' way to start the session off. For you guys specifically, what do you feel like causes your lack of discipline? Because, and I want to give that question some context, maybe whilst you think about that. And again, feel free to put some answers inside the chat. I want to give that a little bit of context. I choose to believe that nobody is born disciplined. And equally, nobody is born with a lack of discipline, right? We come into this world neutral. We come into this world not knowing how to eat, speak, talk, walk, poop. There's a lot of things that we don't really know how to do or how to do in the way that we're supposed to do them. And we learn how to do these things over time. And so what I say to most people is if you're experiencing a lack of discipline in your trading, maybe it's in other areas of life and that's spilling into trading, then there's usually a reason for it, right? There's usually something that you've learned along the way that has caused you to become undisciplined in your approach to the markets or approach to life in general, right? For some people, that may be the case. And again, the important part to start building this high level of awareness and then working to overcome those problems is actually identifying what causes your lack of discipline specifically with trading. So for everyone that answered yes, give that some thought. And if you have an idea, throw them out in the Zoom chat. N&M Partners says, I think my lack of 100% discipline is not having patience in the long term. Demetrius also says a lack of patience. So we'll throw this one up. Lack of patience, lack of long-term thinking. I'll break those up into a couple of different ones. Anybody else got anything that's a little bit different from that? Lack of patience, maybe lack of long-term thinking. I'll throw up a couple of others that are quite common that I think usually go undiagnosed, and we're going to dive into one of them specifically today. Alden says, I got a time pressure to make it in payouts and more income. Okay, so time pressure, definitely an important one. Haraj says, lack of waking up early in the morning for the London session because I work till 3 a.m. Interesting. So we'll call that, I'm not even sure I'd call that discipline. Like sleep is a good and regular part of what should be your normal day-to-day routines. I wouldn't call you lazy for not waking up if you're working till 3 a.m. But we'll just say lacking structured routine. 11 says FOMO, N&M, not seeing quick results. Good one. Not seeing quick results. No rewards for the effort. Demetrius got a good one. Social pressure to make it in what I do, right? So a variety of different reasons here. I think another couple that, again, a lot of people are not very conscious of, but often applies to a lot of people, is spending too much time on the charts. By the way, I've become very aware, I think in this last week or so, somebody pointed this out in a week that I think everyone can hear me typing. I have a mechanical keyboard. If it becomes distracting, please let me know. I'll try and mute myself whilst I'm typing. But yeah, spending too much time on the charts is a killer for a lot of people. And again, a lot of people overlook that. Just watching the charts unnecessarily. We'll dive into a little bit of that today. A lot of people lack the skills to lack of ability to regulate emotions. And the silent killer that I think not enough people are very, very aware of is boredom, right? I think boredom is one which takes a lot of people by surprise. I think a lot of people come into trading. Alden's got a good one, which I'm actually going to add on and I'm going to talk about today. The feeling of not doing enough, right? If I'm absent from the charts, okay? That feeling of not doing enough. We're really going to dive into that one when it comes to talking about the psychology behind why we experience what we experience, right? Because there's a very rational and logical reason behind that. And Alden, I'm going to use you as an example, actually, or I'm just going to dive back into that a little bit later in the session, if that's all right. But this is a very good list so far. I think it covers a lot of the basic reasons. But again, a few of these really, really stick out for me. And I think once you learn a process and a routine as to how you can start to improve this, and especially just becoming aware of what the triggers are behind a lot of these problems, is going to start to go a long way to help you, right? So the first thing that we always like to do is just to gain clarity around the problem. Excuse me 1 second. Didn't have time to mute myself. God. All right. Okay. Second, an important question. And again, we're going to use this a little bit towards the end of the session. When you experience all of these things, when you experience what I like to call all of these triggers that ends up driving a lack of discipline in your approach, what impact does it have on you, right? This might be different for each and every one of you, but discipline is a very, I guess, broad term. And how it's going to impact you is going to be very, very different. It might be the same, but again, what detrimental impact do you feel a lack of discipline has on your trading? Feel free to throw it in the chat. Okay, Raj has got a good one. Kills your consistency. Demetrius says, takes me 2 steps back. 2 steps back. Alden says a lack of self-control. All valid, all completely valid. Apologies, but I feel like there's possibly a little bit of a delay in the chat getting back. So please don't feel like I'm just standing around. Lack of self-control. 11, taking unnecessary losses. NNM ended up killing something that was going well, so ruining an otherwise good performance. Yeah, all completely valid things. And again, very, very important to be aware of. The two that I find are very, very common is usually the lack of consistency. That lack of consistency often leads to a lot of the other issues as well. And then I guess the fundamental way, or the umbrella way that I like to label it for a lot of people, is trading on tilt, right? Trading on tilt is the idea of, it's the poker term framed around the idea of basically trading based on emotions rather than some kind of logic. Stacy says cutting out of a setup trades early, right? We'll say cutting trades early. But again, I think very closely linked to probably consistency, right? Not sticking with your plan, essentially. So really, really important areas to be aware of here. We've started to identify what causes a lack of discipline, and we've got a variety of different things, and then the impact that this generally has on you over a period of time. Okay, this is a good start. Where do we go from here? Well, when I can get my screen sorted out correctly, give me 1 second. Okay, we want to talk about now why it's difficult. I want to help you guys to understand a little bit of the psychology behind why this concept is actually so difficult for most people. So, firstly, something that we've discussed, I believe, in session 2, when we talked about uncertainty, we talked about this idea that input doesn't equal output, right? As a reminder, to give you a refresher on what I'm talking about here, Alden says, a week ago, I experienced exactly that. Trading on tilt, I was shocked how I wasn't able to realize that in the moment. Are there triggers to help? Alden, I'm going to note this question down. I'm going to come back to it towards the end, because we will, I think, start to unpack that, but I will address that properly towards the end, if that's all right. Why is discipline difficult for most people psychologically, right? So we're taught this idea, or what we covered in session 2 was this idea that input doesn't equal output, and this generally applies in a lot of different areas of life. So we are generally taught that when you do fixed things, you get fixed outcomes off the back of that. And the human mind, naturally, in most situations, are wired to believe that as a truth about the world. So, for example, and again, these are ones that we talked about in our session on looking at uncertainty, right? In school, you are taught that if you do good things, you will be rewarded, right? You are taught, for most people, you're taught about the idea of karma. Good things happens if you're a good person, right? These are just common things that people tend to accept. Maybe not everyone is going to have the same ones, but I can pretty much guarantee someone's going to heard of at least one of these along the way. Maybe it's to do with exercise. You've been taught that a balanced diet and exercise makes you fit. and work. You're taught working hard and dedication is always rewarded, right? These are things that you're taught about the realities of life. Maybe these are ingrained into you from your parents, your guardians, your teachers, your friends, your aunts, your uncles, whoever it was in the early stages of life, probably ingrained into you one of these specific ideas. And me highlighting them up here does not mean that they're not true. In a lot of areas of life, these are complete truths of the world and realities of how the world operates. The problem is, as a trader, good actions don't always yield good results. And most of us come to learn this the hard way, right? Most of us start off our weeks or our months nice and disciplined. We have good intentions. We've done all our analysis. We've done our back testing. We've done everything right that we are supposed to do in order to be able to make money. And then we put a trade on, we get stopped out in record time, and we get pissed off because the market hasn't done what it should have done and rewarded your hard work and preparation. And as a result, you're annoyed, and you get left in a place where you're frustrated. And again, it opens this door to starting to trade on tilt, essentially. And the reality is, as a trader, you have to accept that you could do everything right and still not make money. In psychology, they refer to this idea as cognitive dissonance, right? It's this idea that you have two completely opposing and conflicting belief systems, and it makes you feel a state of unease or confusion internally. And that state of confusion opens up the door to emotions, actions that you're not really used to. But they coin this term cognitive dissonance, right? So on one hand, you're being taught all these truths and realities about the world as to when you do X, Y, and Z, you should expect A, B, and C. But when it comes to trading, that fixed paradigm does not exist anymore. And that is very, very mentally hard to accept. The problem is, and the reason I highlight this, and again, we probably talked about this inside of our second session, is not many people truly acknowledge that this dilemma exists for traders. They don't truly accept the idea that I can do everything right and I can lose money, and that will always be a truth about the markets. Most people approach trading from the idea that there's going to be a certain level of knowledge, analysis, skill, connections, mentors that I could find that is going to help me to fill in that gap. And they hope that they're never going to be wrong, or they could have a 90, 95, 99% win rate. All these disillusions about the market, which just simply they will not ever be able to achieve in reality. Okay, so this is the first thing to be aware of. We have two conflicting belief systems which often work against each other, and this poses a very, very big issue for at least a level of mental stability in the markets, right? The second thing, just before I move on to the next one, does that first point make sense to everyone? I'm hoping everyone so far is up to date with our sessions, and this is going to be a little bit familiar from session 2. Perfect. Okay, awesome. The second thing is there is a commonly taught price of inaction, right? What I mean by that is how many of you guys have heard the terms, the wording, the phrasing at some point in time. If you had bought Bitcoin in 2012 or 2013, 10 years ago or so, your investment would be worth X amount. Or if you had bought Apple 20, 30 years ago, when the stock price was here, or when it last crashed, or if you bought it during the last global financial crisis, or if you bought Apple stock every time you bought an iPhone, or whatever it is, your investment will be worth X amount, right? 11 says, I hear that all the time. And this is a common narrative. I see this a lot more these days, especially in the crypto space, right? Because there's so much volatility in that area. For those of you that trade crypto will understand exactly what I'm talking about. There's so much volatility. There's so much hype that is behind that scene, right? The whole of FinTwit, all the crypto guys, they love talking about this, the shit coins, the meme coins, all of that kind of volatility. And what it does essentially, without them having to say the words, is mentally it tells you that there is a price of inaction, right? Not doing anything has a price. And the moment we start to accept that as a truth of the world, again, it has an impact on our belief system. And we believe that if we are sitting on the sidelines and we miss out on a potential move, it's connecting with a belief system that runs deep that tells us we are potentially missing out on life-changing amounts of money. And until you understand that you're being driven into taking these positions largely because of these sorts of narratives, you'll never really understand where it came from, right? Clip says, trading shitcoins fucked my mental and my approach for real trading for a couple of months, to be honest. It's a reality, right? A lot of what it takes to succeed in those sorts of areas of very high volatile markets is not the same approach that you necessarily want to be bringing into trading. I guess you can call them slower markets, right? FX, maybe even indices or commodities compared to crypto. They move very differently, especially when it comes to volatility. And so understanding that most of us are generally wired with this idea of there is a price of inaction is a very, very important thing, right? It's very, very important to be aware of. So very quick exercise that I want you guys to do. And again, you're welcome to share this in the chat, but I'm going to give you 60 seconds or so where I'm just going to stay quiet, which is going to be a shocker for most people because I love to talk. I'm going to give you 60 seconds or so, but I actually want you to stop and think about what memories do you have where FOMO was real, right? When you feel like you should have got involved, it didn't happen. Sorry, you didn't get involved. You felt like you should have, you didn't get involved, and you missed out on a move, right? Took off completely left without you. Because the reality is, every time you are eyeing up a potential opportunity on the charts, there is going to be pretty much I guess, an equal opportunity of it being up going for profit or equally going for a loss. Yes, you could stack probabilities on your side, but those probabilities only really play out over a large sample size of trades. It's the exact same way you could flip a coin, and yes, there are 50-50 odds, but it's still possible to get heads 10 times in a row if you look at it over a large enough sample size. You can't guarantee the outcome of the next position, but over a large enough sample size, you can start to draw some probability from that. So the reality is, if you are someone that is driven by FOMO, and we already established this in our previous section where we talked about what drives a lack of discipline, I want you guys to get clear on what memories you have where FOMO was actually real. Do you have specific situations where you thought about buying something or someone recommended getting into something and it didn't play out for you, and you actually watched that market take off without you, and it reinforced this idea that there is a price of inaction, right? I'm going to leave you guys 30 to 60 seconds. Again, feel free to share some examples in the Zoom chat. Otherwise, I just want you to just be very, very conscious of these periods of time because all of this is an important part to the process. N&M Partner says that I would miss the opportunity of a lifetime and there would never be another one like it. So exactly that, right? But do you have a specific example? So Alden says, happens every big crypto pump. And again, I think it's very, very common. Super, super common for a lot of people. I had this situation literally this week. I'm not going to say I'm not a believer in Bitcoin. Demetrius also says crypto. Again, it's the area I tend to see it most as well. I'm not going to say I'm not a believer in Bitcoin, but I don't have any money at stake in it at all. And it's not because I don't believe I don't believe Bitcoin is going to be the next big thing. I like the idea of blockchain. I just don't think it's going to be Bitcoin. I could be wrong. It wouldn't be the first time. I've got a friend that is heavy into Bitcoin. And he's been telling me to buy it for months and for months and for months. And obviously, with Trump being elected and crypto pumping, he was on my case this week. I told you, should have bought this, should have done this, da 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 da. NNM says, with XRP judgment, I remember it perfectly. And with Pepe, every day of the week almost, I'm still trading shitcoins every day, and I miss many opportunities. This is important to be aware of, right? Very, very important to be aware of, especially if you're someone that's still involved in crypto very, very actively, and you're feeling like you're experiencing all of this very, very regularly, right? From a psychology standpoint, but can separate crypto from trading. Okay, cool. From a psychology standpoint, I just want you to be mindful of the belief system, right? Because what tends to happen in the vast majority of cases is you could do the right things 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 times out of 10, but more often than not, when you have a moment of weakness and you start trading on tilt, you're doing it from a place because your mind believes that there is a price of inaction. There's a price of doing absolutely nothing. And Alden says, can you address the term opportunity cost? So opportunity cost is essentially the thing that you've lost out on by not taking up an opportunity. So for example, I'll try and give you the most basic example possible. If I was walking down a road and there was an option to either go left or to go right, if I went left and I found £100 on the floor, but if I had gone right, there was £1,000 on the floor. The opportunity cost of going left rather than right is £900. That's what it cost me in terms of opportunity. And people could use this term to quantify the cost of missing out on opportunities when it comes to trading, for example, right? But the thing that I want you to be aware of here is what most people fail to acknowledge when it comes to not taking action is similar to what you said here, Alden. There is an opportunity cost to also doing nothing. Most people are wired to believe that doing nothing means they will immediately lose out, and their mind only gets them to believe and relive situations in which they have missed out. If I was to tell you that actually by doing nothing and observing, there are many occasions where you will actually experience saved money, right? Losses that didn't need to happen because you didn't take action, or periods of frustration that never happened because you never got involved in the markets. Sometimes getting into a trade, it's not going to pan out as you expect. And that doesn't necessarily mean it's going to end in a loss. It means you'll get into your position and maybe it will just end in chop. Maybe it'll just go range bound. Maybe it'll just do nothing. Maybe it will take a high, take a low, and turn into this kind of seek and destroy type profile, right? There are 100 different market conditions in how they can be quantified and described. And when the market doesn't match your expectations of what you'd like, I've been in positions, and I know this especially as a swing trader, where if the market doesn't necessarily move in the way that I like, I'm like at this point, I think sometimes I'd almost just prefer to be stopped out rather than just sitting in and waiting inside this position for something to potentially happen, right? And that's when you know it's bad. That's where you know when you'd rather just take a loss rather than actually be able to keep the money that's there. You're in a mentally very different state. Okay. So again, just something to be aware of. Most of us are wired to believe there is a price of inaction, but we completely ignore the other side to the coin, which is that actually sometimes doing nothing is the best possible thing for you. Sometimes just observing the markets and choosing not to risk any capital is one of the best things you could potentially do. Okay. Last thing I want to mention here, and this goes back to, I think it was what Alden mentioned a little bit earlier on. I have this philosophy on the 9 to 5 mindset. Just yes or no in the chat. Again, this is it's not a good or a bad thing or anything like that. It's just for my understanding. Yes or no in the chat. How many of you guys have a job or a business that you actively work in outside of trading? I'm presuming it's going to be most people. But is there anybody here that is already has the time or created that opportunity to full-time trade? Or does most people have, okay, cool. So it seems like the majority of us have a 9 to 5, a job, a business, whatever it is, maybe apart from Eclipse, right? Eclipse, and again, maybe this is a good question for you. Did you come from a 9 to 5 job or a business before going full-time into trading? Okay, perfect. Because in this day and age, it's actually more rare to not having gone down the 9 to 5 mindset. And maybe this is specifically more so with the 9 to 5 mindset rather than the business and entrepreneurial mindset. And I'm going to explain. When you come from the 9 to 5 world, this is a question again I want to throw back at you guys. How do you make more money? When you have a normal 9 to 5 job, how can you make more money from that job? There's really only 2 ways you can do it. Okay, perfect. 11 has said the first one, which is work longer hours. Right? What's the second option? Right? If you have a normal 9 to 5 job, the 2 options at making more money are number 1, working longer hours. Number 2, anyone want to guess? Bingo. Perfect. Right? I always like to coin this as, sorry, typing in the Zoom chat, becoming more skilled, right? This might mean getting a promotion, picking up extra responsibility, whatever it may be. But those are essentially your only real 2 options, right? When you want to make more money from your job, you either exchange more time for money or we choose to become more skilled, okay? Now, if this is what we are wired to believe about making money in the world, and again, this is something that often happens to a lot of people unconsciously, I want you to be very, very mindful of what this does to your mentality in the long run. What I mean by that is what a lot of people tend to do is they carry this thought process into trading. They carry this idea of how to make more money into trading, and it works directly against wanting to be disciplined. So I want you to think about this paradigm for a second. If you're wired to believe that in order to make more money, one of the ways to do that is to start working longer hours, how does this translate in trading? Well, you'll start thinking that in order to make more money, I have to spend more time at the charts. I need to watch more candles, right? I need to do more things. I need to spend more time consuming more information to be able to make more money. Alden's right. It's a complete paradox, right? Often what happens when we spend more time at the charts, when there is no opportunity available, we try and create opportunities which simply do not exist. And this works directly against our idea of being disciplined. The reality is, and what psychology has, and education in psychology has shown me, is that you will find whatever you are looking for. You will find whatever you are looking for. If you're looking for a reason to be in the markets and to be actively trading, guess what? You stop and stare at a chart long enough, you will justify a reason to be in the markets. The second side of this, and this is going on to N&M Partners' question here. He says, spending more time studying and improving, isn't it better, right? The second side of this is becoming more skilled. In your 9 to 5 job, if you want to get a promotion, maybe it means you have to do an exam. Maybe it means you have to learn something new or take up additional responsibilities, right? But essentially becoming more skilled in your field in order to go up a level. Now, this translates in our trading in learning something new, refining our approach, tweaking our strategy in some way, shape, or form to essentially help us to understand more so that we can have a better approach towards the markets. And in reality, the truth is somewhere in the middle, right? The truth is somewhere in the middle. Spending more time studying and improving, isn't it better? Yes, to a certain extent, right? There is a rule, a law they apply in economics called the law of diminishing returns, which means that your time and energy spent on a certain thing is beneficial up until a certain point, right? It's the same as doing, for example, I'll give you an easy example to compare this to. It's like doing press ups, right? If I told you guys to go and do 5 press ups, for the vast majority of us, probably be quite beneficial. If I told you to do 50 press ups, it might be a stretch for some of you, but maybe still doable depending on your fitness levels. If I asked you to do 1,000 press ups today, well, really, the benefit you're probably going to feel in the first maybe 0 to 50. And then from 50 to 1,000, you're actually going to get a worse result as a result of pushing yourself through that, because you're probably going to physically injure yourself from pushing your body far past this capability, and it's actually going to be worse off for you. So the reason I point this out is, for the vast majority of people, when I tend to work with them, at least from a psychology perspective, I end up doing one of two things. And this is obviously going to depend on where they are in their journey, but those one of two things is usually spending less time at the charts and simplifying their approach. Because what happens, especially when your approach is 60, 70, 80, 99% technical, there are an infinite number of ways that you can analyze the charts. And if you always believe that the missing piece to the puzzle is a way to analyze the charts technically that you do not understand yet, you will spend your entire lifetime trying to find the right approach that's going to unlock the holy grail for you, which does not really exist, right? What most people need is actually finding a very, very basic and simple edge and keeping it as simple as possible. Where most people go wrong is they find that basic edge, then they go through a period where it does not work right, and then they end up complicating their system by adding new levels and layers of analysis because they think it's going to help them to alleviate a loss or a losing period instead of actually focusing on what keeps it raw and simple in the short term. Now, N&M Partners has asked a good question. How do we know where the perfect break-even point is, right? How do we know where we find that balance? Alden is on the right approach with this, which is it's got to be data focused. And I would say for the vast majority of people, you want to be very conscious about the idea of, why am I choosing to learn more in this situation? Because where most people go wrong, especially when it comes to this idea of being more skilled, it comes from a place of desperation. When you're trying to improve your approach from a place of, I'm trying to alleviate this last loss, for example. And by the way, I want to give this some context. This is on the basis that you have an edge. If you don't yet have an edge, if you don't have a strategy, if you don't have confidence in an approach, then yes, spend fucking time on the charts. Spend time going through, analyzing, backtesting, collecting data, whatever it is. If you are doing this from a place of, I am trying to alleviate these last 5 losses that I took over the last quarter, and you're doing it from a place of, I just don't want to experience that pain, more often than not, it leads you down a path of detriment. Where is the right time to actually start refining your approach over time? And maybe this is going to be what Demetrius is saying here. Demetrius says, what can you do if you are really passionate about trading and you really love looking and trying to understand the charts? I'm going to come back to that question, actually, because the ending bit was interesting for me, right? But for me, the point of where you're making actually a positive shift forward is actually going towards the point of making changes and tweaks based on data. It's based on saying, okay, I have observed over the last 3 months that this was my approach. I was consistent with this approach because this is what my edge tells me to do. However, Had I done X, Y, and Z, and this is shown to be true over the last 100 trades, and this is something that I'm actively keeping track of in my journal, now I'm not forcing this need of needing to become more skilled from a place of desperation, and I'm doing it from a place of data. Your outcomes could be very, very similar, but the mindset behind it is very, very different, right? This is a difference in the 9 to 5 mentality versus actually improving over time based on data as a trader. For most people, it's the standard and typical 9 to 5 mindset which they bring into the markets, which tends to, and again, I say tends to because it's not going to be the same for everyone, but it tends to lead to a place of more detriment rather than benefit. Alden says, do you believe in the 10,000 hour rule? Yes, I'm not going to say it doesn't work. And again, what I'm saying here is not me saying that this is spending more time on the charts is not beneficial. But I want you to be mindful about your approach in how you do this. If you're spending time on the charts every single week looking how to tweak and refine your approach and change it every week, this is not beneficial. If you're spending time on the charts to gather data real time and then refresh back on this over the next 3 to 6 months and then say, I've now got data that proves that if I had done X, Y, and Z over a large enough sample size, this will outweigh my current approach. And therefore, it makes more sense for me to shift onto this. That for me makes much more strategic sense to your approach, right? One is coming from a place of emotion and pain avoidance, and the other is coming from a place of logic. It's data, it's process driven in what you believe. NNM says, for example, I have decided that I am not going to add any more theory other than what David teaches us. It will just be to practice and improve the concepts learned, but not to learn more theory because in the end, it never does. Would this be okay? This is true because I have a friend who knows much less and has better results. Very interesting statement here, right? In regards to what you mentioned about David, like I said, I think for the vast majority of people, keeping it simple in terms of your edge and adding the refinement over time is I believe, and from what I have seen and experienced, a far, far better approach. The second part to what you've said there, I think should be a clear message for everyone, because this is the idea that actually to be successful in trading over a short period of time, you don't need to know a lot. You can go in, you can learn to click buy or sell, and you can get lucky over a short period of time, and it will actually produce a better monetary result, right? So the one thing I wanted to come back to was the quote from Demetrius, which said, what can you do if you're really passionate about trading and you really love looking and trying to understand the charts? Demetrius, maybe I'm going to have an unpopular opinion when it comes to this. I don't ever believe anyone will ever get to a stage where you will truly understand the charts. For me, this is all a part of accepting uncertainty. If your conquest is, I want to be able to learn and to read price action and understand the story that it is telling on a day-to-day basis, my belief is that doesn't exist. That does not exist for absolutely everyone. And this is why I'm more an advocate of preaching this idea of risk management. And when you're a risk manager, the outcome of the trade does not matter next. I'm not saying improving your edge is not important, but I'm saying you will never get to a point where you understand the markets. There's always going to be someone smarter than you, an algorithm that's faster than you, and someone that has more connections, knowledge, and information that will be able to outdo you in every way, shape, or form. I have tended to find over, and again, this is my belief system, the pursuit of trying to understand the markets. And when I started, I went down the rabbit hole of ICT and believing that there was an algorithm that controlled everything. I found that was more detrimental to my mindset because I was seeking this idea of perfection that was never truly attainable over a long enough period of time. Okay. 11 says, if you know every strategy there are, you will never take trades because they will contradict each other. 100% agreed, right? 100% agreed. You have to remember, every time you buy, somebody is selling. Every time you sell, somebody is buying. There is, at least if you're dealing with a proper broker and they have connection to the actual market, this is how the market actually moves, right? They're connecting and pairing orders together. So for that dynamic to be true, for the markets to actually move up and down, strategies have to contradict each other. For someone to make money, somebody has to be losing money on the other side of that position. Trading is a zero-sum game in that respect, and that's something that we have to be aware of. Okay, so I'm hoping this idea makes sense to everyone. And again, I'm trying to find a way to draw this line and help you guys to understand the difference between. I'm not saying stop spending time on your charts, and especially if you're part of the boot camp and you're learning something new, this is the time to spend on your charts. This is the time to actually spend those hours. But once you have your strategy down, you need to shift your mindset in terms of how you refine and tweak your approach over time. You need to make sure it's coming from a place of data and not emotion. And I say this purely because your mind will make the emotions feel so believable at the time that you will think they're coming from a place of logic, but they are really, really not. A good process-orientated decision always comes over a period of time with a large sample size of data behind it. If you're doing it from a place of pain in the short term, it's more than likely going to be detrimental to you in the long run. Alden says, can you come back to my question about trading on tilt and not realizing it? Yeah, Alden, I'm going to mention it at the end when we go through a little bit of the Q&A, because what I'm coming to next is how you start to overcome and improve your ability to be disciplined in the markets. And I'm going to start to use some of those points to help you with this, okay? So again, I'm hoping everybody understands the narrative of where I'm coming from in terms of the psychology here, right? I'm hoping these three ideas make sense. Input doesn't equal output. We tend to have a belief system which shows there is a price of inaction, and our typical 9-to-5 mindset for the vast majority of us does not wire us for success in trading. NNM says 9-to-5 has burned our brains. 100%, right? 100%. And again, you have to remember that the 9-to-5 mindset is, I think, for the vast majority of us, ingrained into most people from childhood. Because you look at the typical schooling system in this day and age, and they are not typically breeding entrepreneurs and business owners. They're not breeding people that are taking control of their own finances. They are more so, at least with most of the schools that I know, they are teaching people to essentially get good jobs and be employees. And again, there's nothing wrong with that dynamic. But if you're an aspiring trader, you have to be aware that the mindset that you need is usually very, very different to this. Okay. So what can we actually start to do about it? Probably the most important section of today. We've talked a lot about why this dynamic exists, at least psychologically, what causes it for most people and the impact that it has. What can you actually start to do to become a little bit more disciplined? Well, for the vast majority of us, and I had, for those of you that attended last week's session or you went through a little bit of the Q&A that we ran through at the end, I believe I had a chat with, I think it was Demetrius towards the end. And one of the things that I talked about on that session was, what is your why? Right? What is your why? And again, happy to throw this out in the chat for you guys to ponder and for all of you guys to think about this at the moment. I want everyone to think and comprehend, why do you want to be a trader? And when I ask that question, for the vast majority of people, you come up with one of two answers, and that is money and freedom, right? Those are the two things that most people are aspiring to and chasing. And what I say to most people is you have to think deeper than this, because these are very superficial levels to your reason for doing something, right? Freedom is too vague. Money is too vague. I want to know, what does it actually do for you, right? Why is it actually important, right? So it could be from a sense of more money would allow you to have bucket list trips that you're looking to experience at some point in your life. It could allow you to retire your parents or to buy them a better house or a better car or it might allow you to help out friends, family, whatever it is. It might give you the ability to have, I don't know, other connections and experience that you maybe want. But that's going to be a certain level of money. And if so, how much money? And what specific experiences are you trying to obtain? If it's freedom, what do you want to do with your time, right? Most people are driven to the idea of freedom because they don't really like, or they're not really passionate about their 9 to 5 job, which there's nothing wrong with. That's cool. You can use that as a driver to get out of the game. But let's say, hypothetically, let's fast forward 12 months down the line. You've become the successful trader that you're envisioning, whether that's full-time, whether that's trading as a side hustle to you, whatever it may be. What do you want to do with your freedom? You've got complete control of your time now. What do? You want to sit on a beach and drink cocktails all day long? Because trust me, freedom gets boring, right? You need something to do with your time to actually keep you occupied. And what most people haven't started to clarify, what do I want to do with my time, right? N&M Partner says, start projects I have in mind. Cool. As long as you have ideas of what projects, what company, right? Start getting very, very specific about those things. The more clarity you can create around these ideas, the better. So what I say for most people is you want to get very, very clear on what you're going to do with more money and more freedom. The idea, the abstract idea of I just need more money or just need more freedom, it doesn't suffice when it comes to creating a certain level of discipline, right? And the reason that I talk about this is essentially what we are trying to do here is leverage a pain point, right? Because once you know your why, you can start to leverage it at crucial times when you should be doing certain things to stop you taking the bad and shitty actions which are holding you back on a day-to-day basis, right? That might be thinking to yourself in a way that if I continue to overtrade or revenge trade in the exact way that I'm doing, I'm not just ruining my own trading performance, I'm actually taking away my ability to be able to retire my parents at some point in the future. I'm taking away my ability to have this bucket list experience. I'm taking away my ability to be able to buy my own house or upgrade my car, which is going to allow me to do X, Y, and Z, whatever it may be. You want to make it as clear, as specific, and as painful as absolutely possible. N&M Partner says, to be honest, to work for myself and use the time for myself and not dedicate it to someone else for money. And that's cool, right? Again, it's a lot of what people are aspiring to. And the only thing I would say, and I think, again, you've got some idea of what this is, but work for yourself doing what exactly, right? Use the time for yourself to do what specifically. It's not something you have to share with me here on this call. And I mention this here because usually a lot of the time, finding this depth to your why can be quite personal, might not be something that you want to share. But as long as you know what it is internally so that you can leverage it at times when you need to do the hard things, you understand why it's so important to you, right? When you truly know what you're chasing, it can really give you some clarity as to what you need to achieve. The ironic thing for me was when I initially went down this process, my aspirations and what I had on my vision board at the time was watches, houses, fancy cars, all of these materialistic things. And when I really got deep on my why and started to work on the things that truly mattered to me, I realized that actually I wasn't a very materialistic person at all, right? A lot of the values that I placed on cars, watches, houses, all of these things really did not matter to me so much. And actually the thing that I place importance on most in this day and age is having my freedom of time to create experiences and usually just trying to see different parts of the world as much as I possibly can. That's what meant a lot to me, right? And it's something that I leverage as a pain point very, very often. N&M says, the same thing happened to me. In the end, the material things stopped mattering with time. 100%. I remember the first time I bought my own iPhone and I spent my own money on it. I think it was the iPhone 6. I think that was the first one I bought for myself. The rest I had been gifted by family and things like this. But I think it was the iPhone 6 was the first one that I bought for myself. Maybe it was the iPhone 4. I can't remember. It was very many, many years ago. And I was amazed, took it out the box, couldn't believe it. I would treat it like this piece of gold. And that thrill lasted all of about 48 hours before I was just throwing it around again like my last phone, and it became nothing to me. And that's when I kind of realized that the materialistic things all fade. The fancy cars just become another car the more and more you've sat in it. The big house becomes just another house the more you get used to it. Your standards increase over time. And so you can only fill that hole to a certain level, because I truly believe the materialistic things will never give you the true fulfillment that you're really, really looking for. But again, personal thing. Alden says, rather risk my money for freedom than freedom for time. Fair. Freedom for money. Yeah, fair. NNM says, my first vision board, it was full of money, cars. Now it's full of experiences and family. That's awesome. Awesome, man. Okay, cool. Second thing that we can apply to this. Know specifically, if I can type today, know specifically what you're looking for, right? And for me, that means being able to answer the question of what is a high probability setup? What decisions are going to pay you the most? I'm going to give these some context in a second. And then build these into a pre-trade checklist. Okay, so when we talk about the idea of becoming more disciplined, actually being very, very clear on knowing specifically what you're looking for is very, very important, right? Getting very clear on what you're looking for can really be helped by understanding what is a high probability setup, because you'll start to understand and you can start to quantify over time when this, and this criteria has been met. It is much more likely that my setup is going to work out the way as expected, as opposed to, not working out. And you can then start to say, okay, well, actually, it's only really worth my time going in on these high probability setups. Or you can say, if I'm going to take a lower quality setup, maybe this is something that I don't want to risk my normal amount on. It's going to depend on your risk management. It's going to depend on your approach to the markets. But ideally, I encourage most people to go for this high probability setup. Understand what that looks like for them. What decisions are going to pay you the most? And I go back to this idea that often the decisions that will pay you the most are the ones where you do absolutely nothing, right? The idea of not acting on FOMO, not chasing the market when there's a bunch of volatility, not getting sucked into a play because you've seen somebody else saying it. You don't understand that those decisions are actually going to pay you the most because they save you in terms of your bottom line. Excuse me. Not taking unnecessary losses are one of the best ways to improve your overall bottom line. And this is something that we all have to understand. Alden says it's so hard to believe. And the way you can start to help yourself to believe it is start to quantify it. Go back over your last few situations where you've acted on FOMO and it hasn't worked out for you, and actually quantify how much money would you have saved had you not acted in that situation, right? When you can actually start to quantify it, you give your mind some logic, some data, some numbers to start to process and crunch and being like, shit, I am actually costing myself this amount of money. And then it becomes a little bit more painful, which leads me to my next suggestion. Alden says, can't type that number here, it's too high. But it's a good thing in the sense that it should be as painful as possible, because the more pain you're going to experience for it, and the more you can link that to the experience or the reason why that it's taking you further away from, the more and more your mind is going to be driven away from doing it. Remember, right? One of the core things that we talked about very early on into the bootcamp is your mind is constantly moving away from pain and it is constantly chasing pleasure. If you are someone that is constantly acting on bad habits, the thing that you have to acknowledge is your mind is putting you in a position where the short-term pain that you are experiencing of a loss, of a potential missed opportunity, they are all outweighing the pain of discipline. And what you have to do is reframe that in your mind. You need to make and understand the pain of the bad habits way worse and understand that there is actually a benefit and a reward to being disciplined. If you can never start to quantify those and be clear on what those are, your mind is not just going to dream those things up. It's always going to be more and more difficult. The last thing I can't remember if I mentioned here is, and again, something that I've talked about a lot on these sessions, is building them into those pre-trade checklists. So before you're taking any decisions or actions, entry, management, exit, and how much you risk, you should have a pre-trade checklist. And I've seen, obviously, from the bootcamp stuff that you guys are starting to build some of those for yourself. You're starting to build those trade plans, and you're doing them in a way which you can visually look at and say, is this criteria met? Yes. Is this met? Yes, 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 yes. And as long as I've got a stream of yeses, I'm now good to take action. If you can't tick off one of those, that is your clear sign that you're about to do something which is more likely based on an emotion, a period of tilt, rather than actually doing the right thing. And again, I'm going to talk about that again very, very shortly for Alden. Amplifying the pain. Again, this is one that we've discussed and touched on in a few areas, and again, very closely linked to what we were talking about before. But I would say specifically for this situation, what is the cost of lacking discipline? For a lot of people, you can quantify this either in profits missed or losses occurred. This is going to be different for different people. You want to be able to recognize one of these might be more painful for you. For some of you, you might say, my bad habits are costing me $10,000 a year, $50,000, $100,000 a year because I have these bad habits. For some of you, it might be more painful to think about, if I didn't have these bad habits, I'd be able to make an extra $100,000. I'd be able to keep an extra $50,000, right? Again, frame it in the way which is going to be most painful for you, and start to implement that as part of your approach to the markets. NNM says, to amplify the pain, we could think that it takes us away from our dreams. Exactly, right? And this is why I started with this idea of knowing your why. Your why essentially is going to be very closely linked with your dreams, your aspirations, whatever it is, and you can start to connect and use all of these things together. Again, frame this around the idea that the mind is moving away from pain and constantly seeking pleasure. If you can make the cost of your bad habits as painful as possible, whether that's monetary in terms of missed profits, whether it's losses incurred, whether it's keeping you away from your dreams, goals, aspirations, your deepest fundamental why, this is going to be very, very important, right? And going to be something that you want to be able to focus on. You have to acknowledge that your mind is complex, but it's also very, very simple. When you really understand and accept this idea that we're moving away from pain and we're constantly seeking pleasure, and if you're doing shit that is taking you away from it, you are not focusing on the right level of pain. You're focusing on some kind of reward that's misaligned and attached to that bad habit. You're hoping that FOMO is going to pay off in this instance, but you're not acknowledging that FOMO over the next 100 trades is likely to give you a very, very negative result over time. Demetrius says, also makes me think I'm a loser in other fields of life. Demetrius, I'm going to come back to that towards the end. We can have a little chat about that. Haraj says, it's funny that the bootcamp members are about 50 people and only 7 to 10 people are watching Sanjay's psychology lessons. They are skipping the most important thing. Haraj, I appreciate that. In all honesty, I don't know how many actually go back and watch these back on the recordings, but what I tend to find more often than not is the vast majority of people are driven for the technical approach. They want to understand this bit. Once they start getting the technical approach, they then realize the biggest barrier after that is the mental approach. Some people recognize it very early, and that's probably the ones that are attending these sessions regularly. The other side to this is the people that are gonna learn those lessons later down the line, and they'll come back to these sessions at some point in time. For real, this is the best part and most important. Thank you, man. I appreciate that. Haraj says, one time I missed your session. It was a disaster. I appreciate that, man. Okay, last couple of points, and then I'll open up for a little bit of Q&A. Um, okay. So one that I mentioned at the very, very beginning, one thing that is really not talked about when it comes to trading is once you have your strategy, your approach, you confident in what you're looking for, most people start to realize that for a lot of us, it doesn't appear every single day, right? It may appear a handful of times a week, maybe it appears a couple of times a week, maybe it appears only 2, 3 times a month. And the one thing that we don't do as part of our trade plan is we don't stop to think, what do I do in those moments where there is nothing to do on the charts, right? In those moments where I am preserving capital and I'm doing the right things in terms of not risking money unnecessarily and taking unnecessary losses, as we've identified in these last couple of sections, but I haven't actually created a plan of what to do when I am bored. So what I say to most people, Alden says, I've never heard anyone talk about that. I 100% agree with you. And I think it's a massive part to the psychology element that everyone misses, right? Trading, when you know what you're doing, is inherently fucking boring. And until you truly accept that idea and accept that being bored is a part of your job, and actually it's a sign that you're doing something well, because it means if you're waiting for a setup, you know exactly what you're looking for and you don't really want to be risking money on those situations. I want you guys to start planning for this situation. So I want you to actively start asking yourself, what should I do with my time when there is no setup? What do I do with my time when there's nothing to do in the markets? That could be something trading related. It could be backtesting. It could be collecting data. It could be reviewing past journals to see, identify patterns of behavior or thought that could lead you to some breakthroughs later down the line. It could be one of those things, right? Alongside this, a good thing to be able to identify, and this is going to be something that you could start to do as you get more comfortable with your plan. What do poor market conditions look like for your approach? If you understand that my strategy only really thrives when we're in a trending market and you look at things from a daily chart, a 4 hour chart, a 1 hour chart, and they're just fucking going up and down like this in a 30 pip range, it's probably not conditions that you want to be trying to force a position in. You're probably better off waiting for market to break out, missing the breakout move, and then riding a continuation the following day, for example. Again, I don't know if that's how your trading plans are being approached. What I'm saying is there are certain times where it can become very, very clear to identify poor market conditions. And depending on how much experience you've had, you'll probably start to experience those as we wind down towards the end of the year. When things start to slow down, when the big banks, hedge funds, institutions are not doing as much business, you'll find market conditions become slow, become choppy. They actually become quite erratic sometimes, right? With the lower levels of liquidity, you're going to find that it's actually starts to become more choppy and less predictable. NNM says David teaches us to identify good conditions. Fantastic, right? But again, be able to do the opposite of this and be clear in what that is. If you know what good conditions are, I want you to be very, very specific on what bad conditions are as well. Having that clarity is going to help you to identify periods of time where you're likely to experience boredom. Because the time when you're going to be most susceptible to doing something outside of your plan is the time when you're bored, you've got nothing else to do, you're trying and hoping to make some money today, this week, this month, and you're trying to force a setup. This might not happen consciously, but if you're not very conscious and have this written down in terms of this is what poor market conditions for me, and when this happens, I should not be looking for opportunities. I should be doing X, Y, and Z, right? For some of you, that might be starting the side businesses that you're thinking about. It might be doing starting the full-time businesses that you're potentially thinking about. It might be playing instruments. It might be socializing with friends. It might be watching something or reading a book based on personal development or finance. It could be whatever it is, right? And again, the reason I keep this towards the end of this section is understanding that a lot of what happens in this area is going to work against that 9 to 5 mentality that we naturally bring with us into the markets. And I want you to acknowledge this from the very beginning. Most emotions come as a result of misaligned expectations. If you fix the expectations to begin with, the emotions that you feel will lose power over you in the long run. In some or a lot of cases, they will completely disappear. In a lot of other cases, they will simply lose their power and they won't be able to control you like they did before. So start getting specific on what you do when there is no setup. It might be something that is not to do with the markets. It might be something that is to do with trading, but not directly live market related. And then you can better identify when you're likely to experience boredom by being very, very clear on what poor market conditions look like for your strategy. Okay. Alden says, the problem here is when you do that from a state of from a recent losing streak, it puts extra weight mentally, right? Alden, let me put it to you this way, right? A losing streak is when you really get to know your data and your edge as well as possible, you will start to understand that a losing streak is not necessarily a bad thing. If you know over the next 1,000 trades, I'm likely to have a 60% win rate, and you're knocking out a few losing trades in a row, then you know that as long as the market conditions haven't fundamentally changed and your win rate is expected to stay the same, then you know that every loser is essentially putting you one step closer to your next winning trade and your next potential winning streak. Because as likely as you are to have a losing streak, you could just as easily go through a winning streak. So the extra weight that you're experiencing is really always just a matter of perspective. And this is something that I want you to keep in mind. 11 says, needed this. Thank you very much. My pleasure, man. NNM says, that is why it's easier to be a good trader when you are not full-time. 100% guaranteed, right? And I know this from other people as well, because I don't know how much, I can't remember how much I've shared with you guys. I'm sure many of you may know I partner with the prop firm Funded Next. I've been very, very fortunate to connect with a lot of their top traders. I've interviewed many of them on the podcast that I run for them. And the one common thing that I find with many of their top traders is most of them are not full-time. Full-time in the sense that all their money only comes from trading. The people that are able to usually function at their absolute best in the markets are the ones that really don't need the money because they have income coming from elsewhere. And my perspective of this, and again, not a lot of people like to talk about this because of a place of ego or whatever it is. I became an inherently worse trader when I had no other source of income. A lot of the reason that I wanted to go down and start my coaching business was because I realized that if I have a source of income, I am an infinitely better trader because I have enough money from my coaching business that pays the bills, right? It will keep my day-to-day running. And when I don't need money from the markets, it's so much easier to be process orientated. A lot of people don't like to talk about this online because maybe it goes against the idea of full-time trading. Maybe it's not an attractive sell. I don't know what it is, but I try and keep these sessions as real and as raw as possible. And the truth is for me, and I tend to see this in a lot of the best traders that I've been fortunate enough to meet, is that the more income you have outside of trading, the easier it is to make money trading. That just tends to be a reality that I tend to see. Okay, cool. So planning for boredom, really, really important one. Last thing that I want to mention to you guys before we go back and address a couple of questions is I think a really simple thing that you could do, and this is going to sound silly from the get-go, is actually to practice discipline, right? What I mean by that is where most people go wrong when it comes to trying to be disciplined is they're trying to be disciplined, but they're also trying to make sure that they execute exactly when their strategy tells them to. And you've got two opposing jobs working against each other. You've got one saying, I need to be patient, I need to observe, I need to wait for the perfect setup. And the other that says, I need to make sure that I capture the moves that are available in X, Y, and Z. And these tend to work against each other. when I tell people to practice discipline, what I tell people to do is do a 30-day challenge, right? Where you give yourself a simple set of rules, and your aim is to be consistent with executing on those rules every single day for the next 30 days. Those rules could be as simple as every single morning, Monday to Friday, I open my charts and I buy euro dollar at 10 a.m. and I sell it at 3 p.m. Right? I buy euro dollar at 10 a.m. I sell it at 3 p.m. I don't care what the trend is. I don't care what the market structure is. I don't care what yesterday looked like. I just buy euro dollar every single day, right? 10 till 3 and I close it. Sounds ridiculous, right? The aim is not to make money. The aim is to get used to executing on your rules regardless of the outcome, right? The one thing that I said at the very start of today's session is that discipline is not something that you're born with. You're trained to do it. And that means you can improve your ability to do it by actually starting to practice it. If you want to get better at following rules, give yourself a very simple set of rules to be consistent with over the next 30 days and just execute, right? It will cost you 30 days of time, but the mental habit that you will start to build in just clicking the button when all your rules are met is something that's going to benefit you for the rest of your trading career going forward. So what I say, the reason that this is often so effective for a lot of people is what you tend to find is by eliminating the need to want to be right or to be active all the time or whatever it may be, it starts to be very, very simple to just focus on doing one thing. And that is my work for my trading over the next 30 days is not to learn this part of my analysis, it's not to do this, it's not to do this, it's not to do this. It's to do one thing. It's just to say, when all of my criteria is met, I must pull the trigger. The moment you learn to do that and you build it into a routine, into a habit, starting to apply that back into live trading, as long as you're risking the right amounts of money, and you're not allowing that idea to start to sway you, it's going to be really, really beneficial. Okay. So keep this in mind, something that you could definitely take away and start to implement off the back of this. And I'm hoping that answers, or at least gives you some actionable things to take away to actually start to improve your levels of discipline, right? This section draws a close to at least the core content that I had planned today. I'm going to tidy these up and I'll upload the notes with the recording so you guys will have an opportunity to do this. NNM says, on Monday, I start with the 30-day challenge. Awesome, man. Love it. We've got, I think, three more weeks of sessions after this. So if you're going to do it for the full 30 days, I would love to hear how you get on towards after 2 or 3 weeks time, right? I just want to hear how that process is going for you mentally. All you're doing is training yourself to just pull the trigger when your criteria is met. Getting in at this time, getting out at that time, regardless of whether I think it's bullish or bearish, regardless of whether I think the market's going to go or doesn't go, simple set of criteria, just start pulling the trigger. NNM says, can I do it by practicing the strategy or does it have to be simpler? As long as you feel like your strategy is simple, perfectly fine, right? As long as it's very, very simple and you're going to find that it's easy to follow. If you're finding that you're struggling to do it with your strategy, simplify it. Take a very simple example that I shared there. And remember, this is all about playing the long game going forward, okay? A couple of questions that we had throughout. Alden said, a week ago, I experienced exactly that. I was trading on tilt. I was shocked about how I wasn't able to realize that in the moment. Are there any triggers to help? So Alden, the best thing that I often advise for most people is a process of either a pre-trade checklist or a journal to help you to recognize when you're doing things. And these ideally are things that you want to be filling out throughout your trading day. As you get more and more comfortable with your approach, these are things that maybe you could start to do at either the end of day or end of week. But if you are new to a strategy, or especially if you're in a position where you have bad habits that are lingering on with you, I would encourage journaling before, during, and after the trades that you're taking. And again, doesn't have to be a life story. It could just be a simple few words that help you to recognize the thoughts and emotions that you're currently experiencing. The second side to that is the pre-trade checklist, right? If your pre-trade checklist is in line with your plan and you said, I'm trading on tilt, which means I'm trading from a place of emotion, you will be able to recognize that because you won't be able to tick off all of the criteria inside of your checklist, right? So if you're filling this out before you enter, before you manage, and before you exit a position, there is no possible chance that you can't be conscious of the fact that you're about to stray away from your plan, right? So if you haven't already got those implemented as part of your routine, the journaling process and the pre-trade checklist, those are the two things that I would suggest to help make you more aware and to give you those triggers that I'm about to do something that is probably not going to lead me to a good place. The journal, you're going to be able to identify the emotions. The triggers are going to help you to realize you're about to do something outside of your rules. So both of those together, I'm hoping should be able to help you, right? Demetrius mentioned something. I actually want to go up and find his comment. Demetrius, maybe you can remind me of what this was in reference to. Demetrius mentioned it was something I was clearly referring to. Also makes me think I'm a loser in other fields of my life. If you're still on the call, do you mind expanding on what you meant by that? Talking about the lack of discipline. Okay, I'm with you. I'm with you. I actually, this wasn't the train of thought that I was going to go down initially, but again, I think and again, I don't mean to say anything to offend anyone here. I actually think if you have the right perspective, that could be a very powerful way to be thinking for you, right? Because ideally, what you want, again, is to create as much pain as possible around the lifestyle that you have at the moment to be able to create the motivation, the drive, and the desire to actually start doing something different. I want you to remember that people only create change from one of two states. You have to be either highly, highly inspired or highly, highly desperate. It doesn't ever come from a place of comfort. It's either inspiration or desperation. The problem is, it's very, very hard to artificially create a feel of inspiration. And so I think it's actually much easier to go through visualization and actually taking people through a process of amplifying their pain to show them the true cost of what they're doing for themselves, and then creating that level of desperation. Demetrius asks, I was also curious as to what you were thinking about. It was purely, I wanted to know what you were feeling like a loser about in all other areas of your life. When I initially read that, I felt like quite a deep area, but when I realized you were linking it back to the idea of just being disciplined, it was a little bit different for me. Stacy says, great session. Thank you, Sanj. Have to go watch the remainder on the recording. Thank you, Stacy. I appreciate it. Yeah, guys, by the way, any other questions, feel free to shoot them in the chat before we wrap up. NNM Partner says, I wanted to ask you, I have a friend who started at the same time as me and he has very good results, but he knows very much less theory than me. And every time he passes me his results, I feel so bad. I feel like envy. And then I want to get things fast to surpass him. Any advice so that this does not happen to me? So, a couple of things that I would say. The one thing that I always like to focus on is I go back to the quote that winners focus on winning, losers focus on winners, right? And it's just a reference to the idea that putting your time and energy and focus into other people is generally not something that's going to serve you. I presume you're probably already acknowledging that, hence you're asking the question. But again, throwing it out there for the purposes of anybody else listening or anybody else watching this back on the recording. The second part of this is I want you to acknowledge that no amount of their success takes away from you being the success that you can be, right? The only thing that's stopping you from achieving it is actually just yourself. It's actually just your own ability to put in the work, put in the grind, and go through and create the outcomes that you are looking for, right? There is something that I'm going to share with you. I think it's in next week's session where we talk about emotions. And it's a great story to help shift your perspective, right? The reality is, I'm not going to tell the whole story now, but I'm going to give you the kind of context of the story. The reality is, you never truly know without the perspective of time as to whether anything that happens is good or bad, because everyone is running their own race and their own journey, right? So, for example, what I mean by that is your friend that seems to be having good success at this point in time may then in 6 months, a year from now, 3 months from now, a month from now, tomorrow, maybe, I don't know. They may go through a period where they hit a low point, they go through their rough patch, and they have to do all the trials and tribulations and learning that they need, right? I remember hearing a story. This is on a podcast called Chat with Traders. I don't know if I'm sure some of you are maybe familiar with it. I can't for the life of me remember which one, but there was a guy that made a substantial amount of money in his first, I think, 1 or 2 years of trading. And after that time, felt like he was basically God's gift to earth, which would be most people's natural reaction. For a 10-year period after that, went through a losing streak, right? Went through a period where he felt like he knew absolutely nothing. And he said it was like the worst period of his life. I actually truly believe the best thing that could ever happen to you at the start of your journey is that your journey is difficult and it's hard and it sucks. Because that's what the start of my journey was like. I went through many, many years of not doing the right things, not being disciplined enough, not being process orientated enough before I had any kind of breakthrough in this area. But what that does for you, for me, it set the right tone and expectation of what this industry is actually like. It made sure that I learned all the lessons that I needed to when I was early enough to make those mistakes on a small amount of money. When you get lucky early on into your career, and I emphasize that if it's early and the results are short term, it's more likely a result of maybe luck rather than skill. I could be wrong. There are going to be situations where that doesn't apply, but it's very, very easy to have an inflated sense of confidence or ego that when you carry with you, you end up paying a much heftier price later down the line because you did not learn those lessons earlier on. The best thing I could ever tell you, and this is from my experiences in life, is that you always get to where you want to be, just never in the way that you imagined. And everything that happens to you in life, there's a fantastic quote by Chadwick Boseman, is the guy that played Black Panther. He said this quote that, actually, you know what? I'm not going to butcher it. I want to look it up for a second. Give me one sec. Because I know if I say it wrong, I'm going to kick myself for it later. Um, give me one sec. Okay. Chadwick Boseman says, the struggles along the way are only meant to shape you for your purpose. I love that quote, right? The struggles along the way are only meant to shape you for your purpose, right? I truly, truly believe that if you're going through a struggle, a challenging time, a period of life where everything seems to be weighing down on you, whether it's just trading, whether it's absolutely everything, if you have the mentality that this is happening to me to teach me a lesson, so that when I get to the point where I'm managing 6, 7 figures, I've learned everything that I need about risk management during this period so that I don't fuck it up at that point. The person that gets early lucky on is unlikely to learn those lessons. And if they hit that million, that 6, 7 figures much quicker than you do, it's likely their tumble from the top is going to be harder. And I'm not saying this to, I'm not wishing the downfall of success from your friend. I wish everyone has success. Like, I have no bad or ill intentions for everyone, but just recognize this is a journey of you versus you. And this is not you versus your friend. And any energy that you're spending on that, you're taking it away from feeling like, from doing the things that you're supposed to do that are helping to make you the person that you need to be. So that would That would be my advice. Alden says, is there any additional tips for break-even traders? Alden, find out why you're maybe this is not for you, but if you are a break-even trader and you feel like this applies to you, the most important question I would ask you, why are you breaking even? Why are you breaking even? You're either going to be breaking even because you don't have a great edge, but you have a good psychology, which is managing to keep you afloat, or you have a really good edge, but you have really shit psychology, which is bringing your profits down. You need to understand which paradigm you're stuck within and then improve the thing that you suck at. So if you have a shitty edge, but good psychology, and this was me at the start of my, well, I started off on one side, I then went completely to the other side and then had to find my balance in between. If you have a shitty edge with good psychology, focus on your edge. Focus on going back through your journals. Focus on more backtesting. Focus on more data collection to improve your edge, to match your psychology so that you can find a more balanced playing field. If you find that your edge is there and you can get into positions where you could have good risk to reward trades or they show to be profitable on paper, but it's your psychology that's screwing you up. It's the mental side that needs works, right? More time on the charts is not going to help you with that. You need to better understand yourself. You need to understand your patterns of behavior. You need to understand your belief systems that are driving them. You need to understand the triggers that are setting all these things off. So the tip that I would give is understand which paradigm you're in and then focus your time and energy on whichever one is weighing you down. So I hope that helps. Demetrius says it's the bad trades you take in between the good ones that makes you be. And again, I think that's the way for a lot of people, but this is where most people neglect the psychology element, right? Finding the edge is actually not as difficult as you think, as long as you know how to quantify. You can find an edge in support and resistance, simple supply and demand. There are people that probably trade trend lines or MACDs or RSIs and have found a way to find an edge in those things, right? But if you don't have the mental capability to actually apply them, then it's going to suck either way, right? The edge is the easy thing to obtain. The work that most people miss and lack is psychology. And somebody pointed that out a little bit earlier on by the attendance of these calls. Again, maybe most people watch the recordings, but I think it's a closer reflection of what the reality of what the industry is like. And I'm not saying psychology is everything, by the way. You need a good edge, right? But you need both. You need edge, psychology, and risk management. You iron out the bulk of those three things, and I think it can completely transform your approach. The main reason I put so much emphasis on psychology is because it influences your ability to be consistent with your strategy and with your risk. So I think if you fix the psychology, you actually have a much better chance of finding that profitability. So yeah, hope that answers your question. Anything else before we wrap up for the day? And again, just a reminder, this is for obviously everyone on the call, but especially for those of you that are watching this back on a recording, if you do have any questions off the back of today, feel free to throw them inside the Discord. You guys will see there are quite a lot of threads now that we've created on the Discord chat. If you go into the channel, check the threads icon. There's a bunch of different threads which talk about various different topics. Which I think will be helpful for a lot of you guys. But yeah, otherwise, if no more questions, we will wrap up for the day. Thank you guys for everyone who turned up today. I hope it's been valuable and insightful. And again, hopefully there's something for you guys to take away from this and apply into your coming week. I look forward to catching up with you again next week, and I'll speak to you all very, very soon. Take care, guys.